feels like a little bit like it's been a while because that we've been together like this, because a couple weeks ago we canceled our gathering because of we were worried about freezing rain. And then, you know what, that's the first time I felt like we were kind of a real church, when on Saturday night, late night, Justin's calling me, he's like, have you seen the weather warning? Like, what do we do? And we had never thought about, like, what do we do before, so it felt like we were growing up a little bit. And so we did a grown-up thing, we canceled church. It felt like the right thing to do. And then it got wasn't really that bad in the morning, and then it got worse. So anyways, sorry about that. Hopefully you all got the message. I don't know did anybody show up? Neil, you did? No. Did you take the bus even? You drove. Oh, you had a car. Oh, I don't feel so bad then. Oh man, I'm so sorry. Justin will take you out for lunch. So, and then last week with Family Day, I know a number of people were away and traveling and doing all kinds of things. And we, you know that we had planned on having a breakfast together. We thought, it's a long weekend. A lot of people are away. Let's just set up the lobby with all kinds of tables and have a breakfast. And honestly, if you missed it, it was unreal. It was so good because for me at least, it reminded me that what makes us a spiritual community isn't just that we get in this room and we have what we call services or anything like that. But being spiritual community and friends is about being around the table and sharing a meal and getting to know each other on a different level. And I loved it because if I don't meet you here on a Sunday morning quickly in passing, or you don't come to our house on Tuesday nights for our midweek that we host, it's really hard to get to know some people as we're growing. And so I love the chance just to be around the table, eating pancakes, meeting people. And so we're definitely going to do it again. It was just a great reminder of what it means to be friends, discovering and following Jesus together, inviting other people around the table. It was a beautiful thing. I loved it. And I love being in kind of this format too. It's always so good to be together. If you're new or just hanging out with us for the first time, or you're just kind of getting caught up, we've been since January in this series exploring different spiritual disciplines. We thought it would be really good for us as we kick off a new year to talk about maybe different ways the historic church over the centuries, different rhythms and practices they have used to grow in their depth and relationship with Jesus. These things, as we've been talking about, there's nothing magical about them. They're not like these, mystical formulas, do this, 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 and then you get this result. But there's these things that we can engage in with our minds and our hearts and our physical bodies to try to meet Jesus in new and interesting and deeper ways. Trying to shake us out of the ruts that we can so easily fall into and say, what would it look like to push deeper in this relationship with Jesus? And we admit that at times, sometimes it can be hard, or let's put it the other way. It can be easy to fall into a rhythm where we just do the same thing all the time and our spiritual life becomes bland. And so we thought, man, these disciplines have kind of stood the test of time. Let's look at some of them. Let's talk about what it would look like to experiment with them. Each week we've had a little bit of a challenge. Hey, try this week, do this week, to see if it will spark something new in your pursuit and relationship with Jesus. And so that's where we're continuing this week. So as I get a little bit older, I'm noticing that these different quirks start showing up and they just feel normal to me. Where 20 years ago, they weren't really a part of my story or my rhythm. So one of those things is when I was like in my teenage years and then through like university, when I went to sleep, I wanted it as dark as possible, like black, black, black. As much as it could get dark in that room, that's how I wanted it, and I wanted it as quiet as possible. I just wanted it dark and quiet. And I don't know where it changed, but now I still love it really dark, but if it's too quiet, it drives me crazy. Does anyone else like this? Like if it's just too quiet in the room, it feels like you can't actually relax. I don't know when this started happening. So we have a fan on in our room, and we don't really use it to keep cool. It's mostly just for this like droning noise. And most of our kids have it. Tobay's the only one who doesn't have a fan in her room. And so when I go in at night and make sure she's okay, it's so quiet in there. Like, I don't know how she sleeps. It's crazy. But we all have these fans going. Even so, like when I travel now, you get into the hotel room, I'm trying to figure out how do I get the fan in this room to stay on and never turn off? Or hopefully there's a bathroom fan. Like I just need some kind of noise so that I can fall asleep. We went on a cruise this past summer as a family. And we got one of these portable fans that we just put in our suitcase thinking it was no big deal to take a fan into our room. There was going to be 5 of us, Bobby and I and our 3 kids in this room. We're like, we need a fan. We need some kind of droning noise so that we can all fall asleep. And so we got in on the boat, we got to our room, we were unpacking, and then my bag never showed up. And then we got a call to our room saying, oh, your bag has been held by security. Can you come on down? Like, what on earth? So then I go down and talk to the people, and they said, oh, you're not allowed to bring a fan on. It's a fire hazard. So the whole week we had no fan, and we had to try to figure out how to sleep, which was an interesting thing. But at the end of the week, they said, at the end of the week, you can come right when you're about to get off the boat, and you can collect your confiscated items. It was just the fan. Wasn't sneaking anything else on. It was just the fan. And so then when we were getting off, I went down to the dining room that was now like this, had been turned into this like almost a huge lost and found. And I'm standing in line, and I'm looking at all these people, and most people were sneaking on booze. Like they had tried to put like these huge bottles on, and with no luck. And so it's kind of a little bit of a walk of shame. Everyone's knowing you're there to get something that you're not supposed to have, and you're trying not to make eye contact. Most people were sneaking on booze. But then there's a number of us with fans, and like we kind of like giving each other the little wink, like, oh yeah, you too. Like we just need it. So I got my fan, and we brought it home, and it was all okay. But I realized there's something about when I sleep that I just need that hum and that something going on, because when it's too quiet, I just feel uncomfortable. I think it has a spiritual parallel as well. I think we're so used to the busyness and the hum of activity and life, and we get addicted to it, that whenever we think of sitting quietly, patiently, and listening with Jesus, it just kind of freaks us out. It's like we can't fully be present because something just doesn't feel right about quiet, because we're so used to nonstop activity and stimulation. So this idea of solitude and silence, for some of us, freaks us right out. So that's what we're talking about today. What does it mean to keep company with Jesus in solitude and silence? And we're going to use a number of really quick snapshots from the life of Jesus to illustrate how this was a part of his regular rhythm. It's not a difficult topic. It's not like a huge theological topic that we really have to dig deep in when we're talking about silence and solitude. It's a pretty simple idea that hopefully we can illustrate, and then we'll have some takeaways for you this week. But I think it's, like any of these disciplines as we've been talking about them, they're easy to comprehend, but to put into practice and to put into our regular rhythm can be quite difficult. So that's what we're going to look at, silence and solitude, and we're going to use the life of Jesus as a way of just getting snapshots of how this was a part of his rhythm. So if you have Bibles, you can crack them open here. We're going to begin in Matthew chapter 4. So we won't read this one. I'm just going to quickly just kind of frame this one for you. So Jesus is beginning kind of his season of teaching and ministry, and he gets baptized by John the Baptist. And there's this like glowing endorsement from his heavenly Father. This is my son who I'm well pleased with. And immediately after that, Jesus goes out. If you know the story, Jesus goes out to the desert to be alone for 40 days. And he has this time of silence and solitude all by himself, almost in a rhythm of preparing for what's next, this great task and adventure that is out in front of him. And so Jesus goes out and he spends. And we think, man, 40 days, how is that even possible? So don't get caught up in the number. Just think about like before Jesus was stepping into this huge task, he moves himself away from friends and relationships, and he goes and just keeps company with God in a special way. And then shortly after that, John, who had baptized Jesus in Matthew 14, we read the story that John, who had baptized Jesus, is now in jail. So King Herod at the time, he had put John in jail because, what's the fast way to explain this? King Herod had married his brother's wife, and John was calling him on that, saying, you shouldn't do that, that's a sin, you've kind of stolen your brother's wife, this is not a right thing. So John's kind of calling it out, and the king doesn't like it, and so he's imprisoned John. So John's in prison, and then we read the story. If you know the story, the way it goes is they're having this birthday party, and his, I guess, kind of stepdaughter does a performance and a dance for the crowd. It pleases everyone, and so he says to her, the king says, whatever you want, I'll give you whatever you want. One wish, it's yours. Kind of like that genie. Whatever you want, you get it. So she says, I want the head of John on a platter. Which is like, what kind of kid, when you're like, you can have anything you want, asks for the head of someone on a platter. So maybe in the parenting series, we'll talk about how to know if your kids are screwed up, and we'll come back to this story. That's not the point. The point is, when Jesus hears the news that John has been executed, he's greatly saddened. And he gets into a boat, he sends his friends away, he gets into a boat and goes out into the lake and just spends time alone. His way of dealing with grief and mourning is to be out and alone. Then shortly after that, again in Matthew 14, Jesus is around. Huge crowds are always following him. If you know and follow the life of Jesus, these crowds are just attracted and flocking to him. So he spends a whole day healing people, ministering to them, and at the end, they're all so hungry. So miraculously, he makes all this food for them, and there's all this left over. And they've had this huge feast, and then we read this in Matthew 14. It says, immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake, while he sent the people home. After sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell, and he was there alone. In Mark's gospel, we also read about Jesus, again, serving and healing and looking after people. And then in Mark 1:35, it says, before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. So after all this busyness, this hubbub, he wasn't like, man, I just need to crash and sleep in. His response is, I need to get up early and spend time with God. In Luke chapter 6, we read, one day soon afterward, Jesus went up to a mountain to pray, and he prayed to God all night. At daybreak, he called together all his disciples and chose 12 of them to be apostles. So before Jesus makes this really significant decision on leadership and the people he's going to bring closest into his circle, he spends this night of intimacy and prayer with God, and then he makes this big decision. One more. Matthew 26, this is right before Jesus is about to be arrested, where he'll be put on trial, eventually executed. And Matthew 26, it says, then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said, sit here while I go over there to pray. So he's with all his disciples, like, stay here while I pray. And then he took Peter and the Zebedee's two sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. He went on a little further and bowed his face to the ground, praying, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. Gary Thomas in his book, Sacred Pathways, says, when he's talking about solitude, he says, all I know is that it's in those solitary moments that colors regain their brightness, truth regains its clarity, and reality loses its fog. So in this life of Jesus, just this really quick overview, we see these patterns of before major decisions, before stepping out into new territory, when grief hits him, when he's about to step into something that he doesn't want to be a part of, and kind of submits and cries out to God if there's another way to make this all possible. In all these instances, we see Jesus has woven into his life this pattern and this rhythm of solitude and silence, of getting away from him. And so there's something I think for us to think about and to consider. So let's talk about silence and solitude. They kind of go hand in hand. Sometimes it's hard to say, well, is it just about not speaking? Is it just about not being with anyone? And those are important, but if you don't speak and you are by yourself, but you don't have a listening heart that awakens and then tunes into what God is saying, then you're just by yourself and being quiet. So it's not exactly the same thing, but those are kind of key ingredients to tuning in. Henry Nouwen says, silence is the way to make solitude a reality. So when you're by yourself and quiet. Dallas Willard says, nothing but solitude can allow the development of a freedom from the ingrained behaviors that hinder our integration into God's order. Let me read that for you again. Nothing but solitude can allow the development of a freedom from the ingrained behaviors that hinder our integration into God's order. There's something about being quiet and alone with a listening heart that tunes into God that somehow shifts these behaviors and patterns that we're so accustomed to, these rhythms, this busyness, this nonstop, this addiction to stimulation, and it kind of reframes and resets us. And the patterns and the values of the kingdom of God become part of our rhythm. Something interesting is happening. Ruth Haley Barton, one of our midweek groups in Milton are working through some of her stuff. In one of her books, she has this awesome line. She says, in solitude, we stop believing our own press. I read that book about a year ago, and that line, I've quoted that, you've maybe heard me say it. It just jumped out to me as I was reading it. In solitude, we stop believing our own press. And I was like, man, that totally hit me. We're not as good and put together and all shiny as we think we are. But God probably loves us and cares for us and wants us in a deep relationship with him more than we think he does. There's something about who we think we are that we need to let go, and there's something about who God sees us to be that we need to embrace. And in silence and solitude, we stop believing our own press, and we start listening to the words and affirmation and receiving the love of Jesus. There's a beautiful transaction that happens when we're silent and alone. It's like we start to tune in and discover our true identity, who we are really meant to be. When we can let go of all the crazy, busy, all those things. Not that in and of themselves they're bad. Being busy and having lots to do and lots of things going on, those in and of themselves aren't bad. But when those things keep us from learning who we are in Jesus and his love for us, when they become a distraction or a way out, then they become a problem. I think one of the things with silence and solitude is that we're scared of it because when we sit in those places, some of our cracks and our warts become more visible to us. You have to kind of stare down some of the junk in your life when it's just you and Jesus. When other people are going on, other stimulation, you're caught up in everything, it's really easy to ignore the parts of your life that you're not super proud of. But when you're quiet and you're just listening and you have this posture of trying to hear what Jesus is saying to you, then all of a sudden some of those things that you know quite aren't right, and as God's working in you and bringing things to mind, all of a sudden you have to face those cracks and those warts. And I think that's part of what makes it really tough. There's this thing, spiritual law of gravity, that that basically says the chaos of the human soul will eventually settle if you sit long enough. Even if you don't want to acknowledge it, whatever chaos is there in your life, that will eventually settle if you sit long enough with Jesus and listen. So the one thing about extended times, I was thinking about the idea of a road trip. So you guys all know I love extended road trips. I just really love that. I know they're not for everyone. But I think of a great road trip with a friend. I've done lots with different friends over the years, in university, lots of trips to Florida, things like this. We're just driving all night and with friends. And the best thing about a road trip, even if you're just with one friend that you really love, that you have a great friendship with, is that it's just one of those best times. You're sharing stories, you're reliving memories, you're laughing, you're creating new memories. You're having these wonderful experiences, and you can also be quiet with each other because you have confidence and you're secure in your relationship, and it's okay just to be quiet. So if someone's driving, the other person can kick back and catch a couple hours of sleep, and you trade driving and the whole... it's actually, for me, so fun. I love that time. But I've also had a few road trips, not super long, not to Florida. But have you ever been in a car for a couple hours maybe when someone's like, hey, can I get a ride to this? And you don't really know that person. So you want to create room, if you're carpooling somewhere. But sometimes an hour drive with a stranger, you feel like you're driving to Florida. Because you feel, at least to me, it feels like you're on the spot. You have to fill the time, you have to talk, you have to fill it up. You're not sure what to say. Silence is super awkward. So you just kind of keep it going. And it's because you don't have this deep relationship with the other person. I think sometimes when we're talking about solitude and silence with Jesus, it's almost like the thing that maybe scares us is that it might feel a little bit like a road trip with a person we don't really know that much. So the idea of being silent and still it just feels unnatural. It feels foreign. It feels uncomfortable. It feels awkward. Because we're so accustomed to this posture of doing, of being, of performing, and all those things we use to give ourselves identity. But when we sit with Jesus, he doesn't care about those things. That's not what shapes how he loves us or how he cares for us. It's simply about abiding. Remember a few weeks ago we talked about that passage in John 15, where Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and my love remains in you. The idea that apart from me you can do nothing. This idea of remaining and being in contact and connection. It feels weird for us to be quiet and not do. You don't have to do anything for Jesus to love you exactly for who you are and to call you into a deeper level of relationship and transformation of your life. And when we're in this space of quiet and solitude, we kind of come face to face with that. So maybe when you're thinking about it, don't think, man, how do I spend an extended period of time with Jesus? It just feels awkward. Don't think about it in terms of a long road trip to Florida. Think about it in terms of 5 minutes around the block. What would it look like for your small steps to be 5 minutes of quiet and solitude? And don't do anything. See, whenever you have this, when I first started experimenting with this, my mind I'm always all over the map. I have a hard time staying focused in the moment. And so I'd be quiet, I wouldn't be saying anything, and I'd be alone, but I didn't have a listening heart. I was immediately filling it with a list of everything I had to get done, who I hadn't responded to in email, people I need to call, what I'd like to have for dinner. All those things start flooding and filling and filling. And for me, at least, it takes practice just to be. So what I use, and this might be helpful for you, is a phrase that would return me back to the point of what I'm doing. It's kind of a centering prayer. And I would always say, Jesus, I'm here and I'm listening. And it would kind of snap me out of, man, I can't wait for Taco Tuesday. And it would bring me back to, this is why I'm sitting here. And in the beginning, I will be honest, 5 minutes felt like an eternity. Not because I don't think I was uncomfortable with Jesus, but because that rhythm was just something I'd never tried before. Jesus, I'm here and I'm listening. I want to receive. I want to tune in. I want to pay attention. At the heart of it all, I think it comes down to trust. We'll talk about this maybe at the end. But I do think it comes down to trust. If you're spending this time with Jesus, there's this element of trust and openness that you need to come with, you need to bring to the table. And that for whatever reason, some of us have struggled with this idea of trusting God. Sometimes we sing songs. We're going to sing it as we close the song, Good, Good Father. And I know for some people, while they might intellectually be able to sing and think about God being this good, good Heavenly Father, the reality of the word Father and what that means for them personally, there's this break and contradiction and pain. And sometimes I think the idea of sitting and being quiet with Jesus, it's because we want to trust, we want to embrace, but it feels like something is out of alignment and been broken, and we don't know what that trust of being quiet and confident in that moment looks like, and we get all amped up, and that's totally fine. I would just say to you, as you experiment a little bit, just think about that centering idea, Jesus, I'm here and I'm listening, and then just be present. So we're going to come back to that. I want to stop rambling. I want to get you guys talking. If you're new with us, what we like to do is spend a few minutes just talking together about anything that this has stirred up for you. So what we're going to do is give you 3 or 4 minutes, invite you to stand, meet new people. If someone isn't in a group, invite them to join yours. And all you're going to, actually, I think I threw up a few questions too. If you like to use these, you can. What's been your experience with solitude and silence? Have you ever experimented with implementing this discipline in your daily rhythms? What did you learn? What are your thoughts on the quick examples from Jesus' life? What stood out? Anything else? So we want to get you talking, and then in a few minutes I'll call us back together, and we want to hear some of the things that maybe are popping up or stirring as a way of learning together, turning it a bit more into a conversation. And so I think that's it. Makes sense. We'll hear what you're thinking, what God's saying, and then we'll wrap up in a few minutes. So why don't you take, it's like 10:59, so let's take 5 minutes, okay? Ready? If you don't like this, you can get out your phone, grab a coffee, go to the washroom, but meet some new people, stand up, make some groups, okay? Go for it. All right, I'm going to call you back. The song ended, so it's like we might as well stop now. It's like God's timing, so. Okay, so yeah, what were you guys chatting about? What jumped out? What were some of the thoughts? You can share one of the ideas you had or share something that came up in your group, even if it wasn't your idea. Just speak nice and loud. If you want to stand up, you totally can. So what were some of the things on this idea, topic of this discipline of silence and solitude? What were you chatting about? Yeah, Ben.
So one thing you said about your road trip analogy is like, even for like the most sociable among us, or people who make friends easily, even for those people, a 24-hour road trip is still different than something.
Right.
So like it doesn't mean, like in a lot of these things it's easy to be like, oh, like, I'm not really wired that way, or it's not the kind of person I am, but like it's almost if you're trying to like do too much at once, it's too much for anyone. Mm-hmm. So we really like the like baby step approach. The baby step.
Yeah, I just thought of this. There's been some people, because I know now my own quirks, and I know sometimes I get weirded out with, sometimes I just am okay to name it. So recently I had to go somewhere with someone. I just thought of this, and I told them before we left. I said, just so you know, like, this is going to be really weird for me at some point. So if you're okay with quiet, we'll just put on some music at some point. And so I don't know why, but I just felt like I had to set that up so they weren't like, Matt does not like me, or like he is so weird, which I probably am, but I just felt like I needed to like level it out. And I wonder, on that note, if it's okay just to admit that to Jesus. As we're sitting in that place saying, this feels really weird, and I'm not sure what to do, and I'm fighting against this tendency and this addiction of being and doing and achieving, and I just want to be here and listen. Maybe that's just a good thing to acknowledge out the gate. Thanks for sharing that. What else? Yeah.
We were talking about how Jesus, before he goes and makes a big decision, he goes and he waits for God's response and direction. And I think something that we were talking about, and it's prominent for me, is when something big is about to happen, I go to God and I'm like, hey, if this could all work out in this way, that'd be great. But instead, kind of changing my mindset to being like, here I am. What's the best plan to come with this? And then you wait and you be patient, and he responds with the heavenly answer, which is like what would be the best. It's who are we to go in all of our plans when he made us.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, what do you do if you try to have that posture of waiting and listening, and then you just feel like you don't get an answer?
Yeah.
That's where I feel like these spiritual disciplines are so important to me, because what we're trying to say is not a formula of getting something. We're trying to figure out what it means to be transformed and changed, and to be kingdom people, to be people who honor and represent Jesus and his way in the right. So even when we have a choice to make and we're not sure what the answer is, we can kind of rely and trust that I may not get this 100% right, but hopefully this formation and this rhythm and this life with Jesus has shaped me to the extent that I'm trying my best to use wisdom and exercise good judgment and make a decision. And then we hold it with open hands and be like, man, maybe that was the wrong call down the line if we feel like we made. You know what I mean? Like it kind of, to me, it takes some pressure off from feeling like I have to hear from God on this exactly before I do anything, and it can feel paralyzing. Rather than saying, God, I'm here, I'm listening, shape me, change me, and then when things come up, hopefully we respond in a way that honors. That's really good. I like that. What else? A couple more. Kyle.
We just talked about the idea of, being in silence in prayer. Just the idea that sometimes it can feel like, you're supposed to do all the talking, in silence, like you said, on a road trip. You want to start talking, you want to start praying in that silence. But what does it look like to have that, open heart to listening? Us not always praying, praising, thanking, but having that, like you said, kind of just like opening up to listening.
Yeah, I think the discipline of silence and solitude is actually a discipline of listening, of trying to just be in a place to receive and to listen. And I think that is really challenging. I think it's something we have to grow into. It's new muscles we need to exercise and new things we need to figure out. One more. Or no more. Yeah, Jode. Oh, you're saying no?
No, I was saying
Oh.
I'll do the one more.
Yeah, okay.
Something that we kind of agreed on, and just looking at question 2 there, is it's a lot easier when you physically move yourself to somewhere different, somewhere out of your day-to-day. It's like I think most of us when we're at home, there's always something that needs to be done, so there's something and so I know I found, when you're up north at that beautiful spot, maybe out on the boat or like on a beach somewhere, something different from everyday life, it's a lot easier. But an example that was brought up that I thought was really cool was lighting a candle with a smell, and that's only when you're trying to be quiet and be in solitude is this candle with the smell. I don't know. I personally thought, that's a different way to look at it. You can maybe be in your familiar surroundings, but that's something that's only for solitude.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That's a really cool idea of how do you use how do you engage other parts of your physical senses in order to kind of tune in, alert yourself, like remind yourself that I'm in a different place. Some people, maybe that's an awesome idea. Some people have like certain places in their house where they may go to, and that's kind of like their space where they try to be quiet. And they try to do that intentionally so that when they're in that space, they kind of come into that rhythm. My mom is, I used to think it was really weird when I was younger, but her thing when she prays and when she's like, she doesn't go to a certain place, she's always in the living room, but she has this blanket that she puts up over her head. And it's like, I don't know, it's like her, like, it's like a little kid who makes the fort for imagination, except she's making her little personal prayer for it. She's like, I'm in my space and here I am, Jesus, I'm listening. And I used to think that was so weird. It's like this really old Afghan, and I'm like, we can see you. And like, if you came home and she's in the living room with that, it was like, especially if you had a friend home from high school, it's like, what's going on anyways? But now I look at it and I'm like, man, that discipline, that rhythm, so rich. I know nothing about that. I have not even skimmed the surface of what that could look like in my relationship with Jesus. It's amazing. That's so inspiring to me. Daunting, but it makes me want to take that first step. It makes me want to kind of figure that out. So the last few weeks I've been kicking around this verse from Psalms, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. I've known that little passage, that verse for a long time. Never really thought too much about it. Always just kind of equated it to silence. Just be quiet, just be still, know that I'm God. But in this kind of conversation, it started taking on new meaning for me. Not only about being still, but the knowing part. What about being still and being present and being with Jesus helps me to know that he is God? This definition I came across on knowing, I found this a few weeks ago. It says, to know is to focus and dwell on who God is with an intensity and for enough time that allows us to center our minds and have our hearts fixed. To know God, to be still and know, is to focus and dwell on who God is with intensity and for enough time to center our minds and have our hearts fixed. Let me leave you with this one thing, then we're going to experiment a little. Ruth Haley Barton, in one of her other books, says, solitude and silence. Do I have this one? Yes, good. Solitude and silence in particular enable us to experience a place of authenticity within and to invite God to meet us there. In solitude, we are rescued from relentless human striving to solve the challenges of life through intellectual achievements and hard work so that we can experience the life of the Spirit, guiding toward that true way that lies between one polarity and another. In silence, we give up control and allow God to be God in our life, rather than being a thought in our head. In that place of our seeking, we listen for the still, small voice of God telling us who we really are and what is real from a spiritual point of view. Then we are not quite so enslaved by the demands and expectations of life. Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. So even though we're not alone, we're going to be still together, which I'm just going to name it, can be really uncomfortable for people. So that's okay. Let's just acknowledge it. I have one of my best friends that whenever there's dead air time, he is that person who has to fill it with something. And so I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable, but I want to just sit in this. So 2 things you can do as you're sitting there if you find your mind just wandering is, if you're not interested in this, that's fine. You can let your mind wander. But if you're interested in this, you can do 2 things. You can just repeat that. Be still and know that I am God. Just think about that idea of stillness and knowing and ask God to kind of reveal himself to you. Just be quiet in that place. Or just use the line, Jesus, I'm here and I'm listening. So it's going to be a little bit strange. You're going to do it this as well at midweek with your groups as you're having dinner and hanging out this week. But right now we just want to create some space and time. Before we jump into that, let me just say this. As we're saying, Jesus, I'm here and I'm listening, we're going to have quiet, and then I'll wrap us up. I'll close this off. And then immediately we're going to go into this time of singing a few songs and communion. And so I just want to set this up. On either side, you can come at any point. And we have bread and juice that represents the broken body and shed blood of Jesus. And as you do this whole thing, as you're quiet, Jesus, I'm here and I'm listening. As you sing, our theme is Jesus, I'm here and I'm listening. As you rip off a piece of the bread and you dip it, Jesus, I'm here and I'm listening. As you head back, this whole time, just keep that theme and that rhythm. Jesus, I'm here and I'm listening. And so while we will break the silence eventually with my voice and with song, I want you to stay in that place of listening and responding and just being quiet. So there will be noise and you're not alone, but that heart posture, that listening heart posture, try to maintain that even as you get up, as you take communion, as you smile at people, as we sing, all those things. We just want to create a few moments here of just being still and knowing who God is and letting go of some of those pieces that we think we have to cling to because they give us identity, and instead remaining in the source of our true identity, the love and rescue and invitation to life that Jesus offers. And so we're going to be quiet. We're going to be still. And after a few moments, I'll try to make sure it doesn't get too awkward. But after a little bit of awkwardness, I will pray, and then Jamie and crew will lead us. And I think we have servers who will come up too, and at any point you can just come up and take communion if you like, as a sign of connection, of thanks, of worship, of belonging to the spiritual family that Jesus invites us into. So let's be quiet. Be still and know that I am God. Father, thank you for this community. Thank you for conversations we're having with a desire to know what it means to move deeper in relationship with Jesus. Jesus, thank you that we can talk about the idea that identity and purpose is found in relationship with you. And while we can say that and think that, we know that's much more difficult to really absorb and let sink deep into us. So easy to define our sense of worth and value by what other people think, by what we can produce, by how good we are at work, by results. And there's nothing wrong with getting affirmation from people and friends and loving the things that we do vocationally. There's nothing wrong with that. But we know it can easily tip into a place where that is our source of identity and purpose. And we lose track of the one who offers us real life, our source of living water. Jesus, this whole thing, this whole conversation over the last number of months has been about learning what it means to remain and to abide, to keep connection with the true source of life. And so perhaps this discipline of silence and solitude is something that some of us need, maybe all of us need. And so as we experiment it with it this week, we know that for some it will be really uncomfortable and foreign and new. Jesus, we just say, we just admit that, and we invite you to meet us in those places. Help us to learn how to let go of the things that we think we need so that we can find what we really are looking for in you. So Jesus, as we sing, we want to remain in that posture of listening. As we come around the communion table, as we break this bread and dip it and remember your broken body and your shed blood, we also, while we thank you for your death, we also celebrate your resurrection and for new life and new hope. And Jesus, thank you for inviting us to the table. Thank you for making a way possible. And so we do it with a humility and a heart that wants to worship. And Jesus, we just say we are here and we are listening. Lead us.